This episode of Paradigm Profiles is called Vigilante Justice, Kane Velasquez. When it comes to our kids, there's no length some of us will stop at in order to protect them. After all, as parents, we are their best protectors, and it's us that they depend on to protect them from some of the most diabolical, undesirable people that exist amongst us. For the most part, society as a whole has always been sympathetic when it's come to a mother or father who's meted out a form of vigilante justice on their child's molester or their child's murderer. Vigilantism, better known as vigilante justice, is a form of punishment that describes the actions of a single person or a group of people who claim to enforce the law but lack the legal authority to do so. In modern day times, I'm sure we all remember cases like Ellie Nessler, the mother who made national headlines after she killed her son's accused molester, Daniel Driver, by shooting him 5 times in the head during a break at his preliminary hearing. Her son's molester was accused of molesting 4 boys, including Nessler's 6-year-old son, when she gunned him down in a Tuolumne courtroom. Some hailed her for exacting her own form of justice, while others condemned her for taking the law into her own hands. This case actually sparked a controversial topic on vigilantism and how much time a grieving parent should face when being subjected to these type of tragic circumstances. When someone harms your children by either physically hurting them or by taking away their innocence in a way that crushes and shocks your conscience, it's almost enough to make you go crazy. Speaking for myself, nobody even has to physically touch my kids. All you have to do is verbally disrespect them, and I'm ready to fight and take your head off. So the thought of them being molested or physically hurt is almost too much to fathom. It's inconceivable. Many of you have asked the question of whether or not the act of vigilante justice would qualify you for the in the heat of the passion defense. Absolutely, and I'm sure just about anyone who is either a mother or a father can relate to this. You know how protective we get when someone just challenges them verbally. We go ballistic and we're ready to defend them at all costs. How many of you remember the case of Gary Plache, the father who gunned down Jeff Doucette, his 11-year-old son's accused pedophile at a Baton Rouge airport on live TV? Remember that? Plache strategically positioned himself at a payphone in the airport and acted like he was talking on the phone. When Doucette was being escorted by in handcuffs, Plache sprung out, pointed his gun, and shot Doucette 1 time in the head, killing him instantly. Plache spent a mere weekend in jail and didn't serve another single day in custody. By law, he should have, and he was supposed to, but the judge overseeing the case flat out refused to lock him up. If it wasn't the weekend, he might have only served a couple of hours. When the judge came back to his courtroom early Monday morning, he released Plache and later gave him a suspended sentence for manslaughter along with probation and community service. These 2 cases are classic examples of when seated judges and public opinion took precedence over the rule of law. All that went out the window because everybody knew it was the right thing to do. It was the moral thing to do. Despite the fact that it conflicted with law, and despite the fact that it was in stark contrast to how a lot of the conservatives felt about taking the law into their own hands. In a sense, this in essence could be looked at as a form of vigilante justice as well. But this was the mindset that made the 70s and 80s so great. Mild radicalism and thinking outside the box was much more prevalent back in those days. As time went on and we entered into the 90s and the new millennium, people got more conservative and the mindset wasn't as flexible. The closest case I can think of where people seemed to sympathize with the form of vigilante justice was the case out of Daytona Beach involving the anonymous father, Sierra Lamar, still comes to mind. That case still bothers a lot of people out there, and it's a case that seared her memory into a lot of the minds that remember what happened to her. Those kinds of abduction cases where a young teenager is kidnapped, sexually abused, and then murdered happens all over the country. That's a fact. But the Sierra Lamar case is a case that people are still healing from. But without further ado, Let's get to the crux of this profile and go over some of the details and events involving UFC fighter Kane Velasquez. By now, I'm sure that most of you have heard about this case and are already familiar with what happened. Everybody and their mother are talking about it. Some people are milking it for everything it's worth, but PMN is just going to touch on it one time. The unfortunate circumstances involved in this story took place a little over a week ago when the accused pedophile Harry Gilardi was arraigned in the Santa Clara County courtroom for lewd and lascivious acts with a child under the age of 14. According to the criminal complaint and according to everything I've been able to gather, Vigilante committed these acts on a child who is related to UFC fighter Kane Velasquez. What's not clear is if it's actually one of Kane's kids or one of his close relatives' kids, as the media keeps reporting. At any rate, Gilardi was able to befriend the child and get him or her alone because he lived at his parents' house in San Martin, where they host a daycare center. This was obviously the perfect sanctuary for a piece of shit like Gilardi. The fact that he still lives with his mother and father at 43 years old not only says a lot about his character, but this in itself should have raised red flags. So the child claimed that Gilardi touched his or her privates over 100 times in one of the bathrooms at the home, and that he or she also seen Gilardi go into the same bathroom with other kids. Just like other typical piece of shit chomos who try covering their tracks through insidious acts of intimidation, Gilardi told the child not to tell anyone or he'd be in trouble. Fearful and unsure of what consequences he or she might have faced, the child kept quiet about it and didn't say a word. For a while, he or she kept it to herself or himself, believing that Gilardi might have done something to him or her. But after growing uncomfortable with more frequent and escalating episodes of Gilardi's perverted touching, he or she finally said something to his or her mother. After hearing about the vile and repulsive things that were taking place at the daycare center, the child's parents immediately contacted the police. The stinging reality of this story, and so many others like it, is that it's getting harder and harder to trust people who are supposed to take care of your kids. These days, it's hard to trust anyone. I mean, you would like to think that your kids are safe when they're being watched and taken care of at what's supposed to be a professionally controlled business environment like a daycare center, right? But these days, you can't take nothing for granted, and you have to be super selective about who you place your trust in. Unfortunately, we live in a day and age where pedophilia comes in some of the most unexpected walks of life. There's chameleons that lurk all around us. Relatives, priests, neighbors, friends, family, teachers, babysitters, doctors, therapists, coaches, daycare workers. The list goes on and on. You just have to be extra careful who you trust around your kids, period. When local police and investigators sat down and heard the illicit story, Gilardi was charged with committing lewd and lascivious acts with a child under the age of 14. And here's the crazy part about it. Despite the fact that this piece of shit is a child predator and is being accused of possibly molesting several different children at that same daycare center, the judge released him on that same day under supervised release. Is it just me, or does it seem like these chomos and these kinds of predatory people who prey on children get preferential treatment? They victimize babies, kids, and small children only to get released back out into society. But then people like Cain, who stand up and do something about it, are locked up and are considered to be a threat to society. I don't get that. Like I said earlier on, the perception and the public's view in the 70s and 80s seemed to be different. Pedophiles were despised and hated, but it almost seems like they're protected these days. On Friday, February 24, 2022, Gilardi was formally arraigned on the charges. It's unclear when Cain heard about the charges, but according to police reports, Cain started following Gilardi's parents on Monday, 3 days after Gilardi's court appearance. Cain allegedly followed Gilardi's parents from their San Martin home to Morgan Hill as they were picking up Gilardi. Once Gilardi was picked up, Cain allegedly continued to follow them in their Chevy Silverado. Supposedly, this Chomo's parents were driving him to Morgan Hill so that he could obtain an electric monitoring device as part of court stipulations he received from a previous case. That's right, this dirtbag was charged in a separate molestation case just days before he was charged in molesting Cain's relative, and the court still released him. They should hold the judge accountable for that shit. According to the police reports and cell phone footage that somebody apparently recorded, Cain allegedly opened fire at the Chevy Silverado occupied by Gilardi, his stepfather, and Gilardi's mom, somewhere near the intersection of Monterey Highway and Bailey Avenue. Witnesses claim he got off 2 shots and then got off 2 more shots near Cochran Road. The chase lasted for close to 11 miles, and witnesses who saw it say that Cain rammed the Silverado several times in an attempt to run it off the road. Gilardi's stepfather was the only one who was shot. He was treated and released for what was described as non-life-threatening injuries. According to medical reports, he sustained a bullet wound to his left arm and another superficial bullet wound to his torso. Nobody else was hit. Not long after Cain allegedly fled from the incident, he was arrested and booked into the Santa Clara County Jail and charged with 10 felony charges. The charges included attempted premeditated murder, 1 count of shooting at an occupied motor vehicle, 3 counts of assault with a firearm, 3 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, 1 count of willfully discharging a firearm from a vehicle, and 1 count of carrying a loaded firearm with the intent to commit a felony. Investigators claim that he was trying to kill Gilardi, but how could they possibly know this? When you shoot into an occupied vehicle, they can't say that your intention was to definitively kill someone in that vehicle. They gotta prove that. Bottom line, Cain got caught up in the wrong county. Santa Clara County don't fuck around, and this is clearly a case of excessive charging. But like I said during my last live, they always charge high and then later come down. I assume that Cain will get himself a couple of good attorneys who will go in there and vigorously fight this case. Everything just happened and things are still in the early stages, but the public is already showing an overwhelming amount of support for him. On top of that, this guy is a phenomenon in Mexico. He's a hero over there, and I'm sure he'll garner support from over there as well. Last but not least, he has the whole UFC world who's definitely going to be behind him as well. I think Cain's going to be okay. I just think it's going to take a while and that he's going to be in for a long ride. I stayed in that county jail for almost 10 years, so I know how things can drag out over there. Before I close this up, I want to address something that a lot of you have been asking about. The fact that Cain is in protective custody. I can guarantee you that this was not Cain's choice. He had no choice in this, as this was done solely at the discretion of the jail's classification unit. All celebrities that go through that jail, like Cain, are automatically placed in PC, period. It comes down to liability, and that's just how they do it over there. He's a famous former UFC fighter. He's still worth millions. He's considered a celebrity, and there's just too many things that could happen by them putting him in with general population. Aside from someone trying to make a quick name for themselves, or someone trying to come up with ways to scheme him out of some of his money, there's just too many issues involving liability that they just won't touch. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. This is one of the many short stories that we're going to start running, so hopefully you guys liked it. There's multiple other projects we're working on right now, including the Q&A, so those will be coming out soon. We're going to get away from announcing the profiles by name like we have been, as there's content thieves out there. But just trust me, we've got a good lineup in store for you guys. As always, we appreciate you all for your continued support and for just the positivity that each and every one of you bring to the channel. Thank all of you, and barring some catastrophic event, we should be doing a live tonight after this airs.